Okay, welcome everyone. We're happy to have you here, and Rabbi Zohn will begin in a moment. If anybody has any questions, you can use the chat, and we will address them periodically throughout the presentation.
Okay, welcome to the nicer program in memory of J. Peter Lunzer, Zochrono Levracha, Hechaver Yehuda ben Hechaver Moshe. J. Peter Lunzer was the head of the Chevra Kadisha of the Jewish Center in Manhattan, and a person who really dedicated his life to Chevra Kadisha in many ways. Sat on a committee called the Tripartite Committee for Jewish Funeral Standards, which was a committee comprised of the Rabbinical Council of America, the Orthodox Union, and the Jewish Funeral Directors Association, which set standards years back for Jewish funeral practices. And so it is an honor to do this share in his memory. May his memory be blessed. I just wanted to begin by pointing out that the topic tonight is the topic of Tachrichim, of shrouds, and perhaps more than anything else, shrouds personify, or shrouds represent the aspect of the work that we do which most reflects our belief in eternity and our beliefs in the Yud Gimel Ikrim, the 13 concepts that define our faith, the fundamental concepts of our faith as defined by the Rambam. Rabbi Lyons, you can probably begin the video, but I will just say that yesterday, in the portion we read this past week, Parshas Vayechi, NASC has dedicated that Shabbos to the ideas of Chesed Shalemus, but the ideas of awareness and preparation of end of life issues and topics that we need to remind ourselves of and take action for. We had a great program. You're welcome to look at it. You can go on our website, nask.org, and click on the Shabbos Vayechi part. And you can go directly on the website called shabbosvayechi.org and download or watch the 2-hour presentation live stream we had Saturday night, which was had tens of thousands of hits and was really a phenomenal Kiddush Hashem. But perhaps more than anything else, Tachrichim represent that part of the work that we do, which is Chesed Shel Emes, in the sense that it's Chesed which is defined by Emes. So Yaakov Kamenetsky, you may have heard this from me before, once said to me, what is the difference between what we do, what others do, what other cultures do, what other religions do? Everyone taking care of their loved ones wants to do it with kindness, wants to do it in a way in which they feel is most respectful. The difference is that what we do is defined not by a specific culture, not by something that is subjective, not by something any one of us feels is the best way to do it, but rather by that which reflects our core beliefs, emes, the truth. And the truth, the only objective truth, is the truth of Torah, as we say, Nosan Lanu, Hashem gave us, we say it in the Berachos HaTorah, Hashem Nosan Lanu Torahs Emes, who gave us a Torah of truth. So Tachrichim, more than anything, perhaps, defines those very basic concepts of our belief. The fact that there is a neshama that is eternal. The fact that we are preparing someone for a journey into eternity. And that journey includes schar v'onesh, includes standing before God for one's final Yom Kippur, for one's final day of judgment. And so the Tachrichim are perhaps the most appropriate form of clothing for that. The Tachrichim, as we'll see, are made in a way specifically that remind us of the Olam Ha'emes, of the world of truth, and the experience that the neshama will have as it travels through that Olam Ha'emes, that world of truth, until finally it will end with Tchias HaMesim, with the resurrection of the dead, which so many Jews don't believe that we even believe in, and is so much a part of our belief, to the point that it's the second bracha in every Shmon Esrei that we say, even on Shabbos or Yom Tov, for Shani Yom Kippur. Every Shmon Esrei has the bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Chayei HaMesim. So, Rabbi Lyons, if we can move on. It used to be that people dressed and were being buried, people were dressed and buried in their own clothing in extravagant ways, which means that they were buried in clothing that was very expensive, in ways that really eventually became a burden on the community, and people were pressured to bury in a way in which they really couldn't afford. And so it reached a point where, because people were shamed into not having the kind of clothing that others were buried in, and they felt they were not taking care of their loved ones appropriately, were leaving the bodies of their loved ones unattended in places like the woods, places that were no one would find them, in the hope that they would not be shamed. Of course, this was in a world that's very different than ours, and that could be done. So Rabbi Gamliel made a takana. Rabbi Gamliel created a concept of tachrichim, of shrouds that would be worn by everyone and would have very specific, that would be uniform, that would be, Rabbi Lyons, I'm waiting for you to please move forward. Okay, Rabbi Gamliel decreed that everyone should be buried in shrouds that are, that have certain qualities, that have accomplish certain things. There is the concept of simplicity, the concept of it being reasonably inexpensive, affordable for everyone. It was also something that had to be meaningful, something that had to have purpose and come from a source that had a meaning behind it. It had to be something respectful, and it was also uniform, so that tachrichim are all the same. And while it's not clear exactly what tachrichim were at the time of Rabbi Gamliel, the Gemara talks about Tzradi Bar Zuzi. Certainly it was at least some kind of a wrap. Perhaps it was some of these tachrichim, but eventually it became a set of tachrichim that everyone wore. And those tachrichim were inexpensive. They had tremendous meaning. We're going to discuss the meaning. It had tremendous amount of kavod and honor to it. And it was the same for everyone. It didn't matter if someone was wealthy, if someone was poor, everyone had the same set of tachrichim. And this represented the core beliefs that we believe in. So that it used to be that a Jew would buy tachrichim when they were actually married. It used to be that tachrichim was purchased, particularly in certain countries. They used to joke that it was perhaps purchased by people's in-laws. It was the in-laws that bought the tachrichim for their in-law children. That was a bad joke. But the fact is that it was something that was purchased early on, in the belief that this kept in our minds the purpose of life, and the fact that life here is really a journey toward a world that is eternal. And the purpose of life is preparing for that eternal world. And so the time to purchase that was at the time of a person getting married. Just like today, I think what might be left of that of minhag is the fact that we buy a kittel. A man buys a kittel at the time that he gets married. And so that is similar to the concept of Tachrichim, since a kittel is also part of what the Tachrichim are. Very important to recognize that the Tachrichim are how we appear, the way in which we appear in the Chevra, the way in which we appear when wearing the Tachrichim is the way we will appear before Hashem. It is clear from many sources that it is important for the Tachrichim to be clean, for the Tachrichim to be without any dirt on it, without any anything in the process of the tahara that can dirty it. The idea is that we appear in the way in which we appear before God, in the way in which we are buried in the aron, in the kever. The way, since Rabbi Gamliel wanted to create a set of clothing that was appropriate, that was meaningful, he chose the set of clothing that Aaron HaKohen, that the Kohen Gadol wore as he entered the Kodesh HaKodeshim. He entered the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur for the special Yom Kippur service. As it says, Ksones bat Kodesh Yilbosh U'michnasei vad yiyu al basaro. He should wear a sacred linen shirt. Actually, it's U'michnasei vad yiyu al basaro, and linen pants should be on his flesh. He should wear a linen belt and a linen headpiece. These are holy garments, and he should bathe and then put them on. This was the way in which the Kohen Gadol appeared before God, and there is no better, more appropriate set of clothing than is this set of clothes. I would say that in my experience, the most difficult sell when trying to encourage people who are not necessarily knowledgeable or observant as to why they should have a tahara. They can understand the being cleaned and they can understand the washing, but they don't understand why a person should have to wear a set of linen clothing. They would be much more comfortable in the clothing that they are most comfortable with in this world. And the understanding that there is so much meaning and purpose to the clothing that all of us wear, besides the fact that it is uniform, besides the fact that this identifies us as Jews. This is how our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents were buried for thousands of years. Certainly in the last many hundreds of years, it is exactly or pretty close to what the Kohen Gadol wore as he appeared before God. And since we believe that we will stand before our final Yom Kippur, it is most appropriate to have a set of clothes that represents the purity, the holiness, and some of the things we'll talk about further about this specific set of clothes worn by the Kohen Gadol. So we wear clothing that replicates what the Kohen Gadol wore, but there's one aspect of it that I think is important to emphasize. In New York today, almost all people buried with the Tahara are buried in linen clothes, certainly the very vast majority. Years ago, that was not the case. And in many communities today, even communities with very strong Orthodox or observant communities, there are still many communities where linen is not something that is worn frequently, and it's something that needs to be understood. it's not only that linen is closer or is the actual replica of what the Kohen Gadol wore, but linen in and of itself has tremendous meaning and importance. There is an understanding that the Kohen Gadol, as we said, wore linen, but linen has special powers of protection. You find this where it's brought clearly. It's in Shulchan Aruch. The Pischei Tshuva talks about it in Shin Nun Beis, in the parak in Shulchan Aruch Yeridea Shin Nun Beis 352. He talks about the fact that linen has special powers to protect us as we journey through the next world. And it has the powers. It's interesting. It talks about the fact that if we have things in our past that are there to prosecute us, the power of linen has to turn those faults or those sins perhaps into things that will actually be as a chus. How that works, we don't know. But it does have power to protect us from things that could hurt us in the next world. And we learn this from the story of Rochav Hazona, the story at the beginning of Yehoshua, where Yehoshua sent spies to Eretz Yisrael to see how best to conquer Eretz Yisrael, and they were taken in by a woman who hid them among the flax, hid them among the pishtan, hid them in linen. And the Yalkut Me'amloes points out, you can read it in English, that's why we quoted it. The Yalkut Me'amloes talks about this tremendous power of protection that linen has. What the Pischei Tshuva says, and has extreme importance, is that this power only is effective if the entire clothing that the person is wearing is made of linen. So that when we are sewing the linen shrouds, it needs to be sewn with linen. It needs to be sewn with linen thread, not just the material itself, but the thread that we're using to sew it needs to be linen. And therefore, even if there is one thread that is not linen, it can undo the entire power of this protection. There is a practical aspect to this, and that we move to the next one. There is very often a minhag that people bring their own kittel to they bring their own kittel to the tahara. When people die, they use Tachrichim that are made of linen. Then people will sometimes bring their own kittel, which was a custom in Europe. I know there are people who, before they pass on, tell their family, when I go, this is the talis that you should take, and this is the kittel that you should take. And people are very strong in wanting to follow the dictate and the wishes of their loved one. The fact is that if you are using tachrichim, which is not made of linen, you're using tachrichim, which is made of other things, whether it's muslin or cotton or whatever it might be, then a person's kittel is perfectly appropriate. And this is why in Europe, people brought their own kittel, because their own kittel in which they daven on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, certainly on Yom Kippur, in which they wore at their Seder, and they wore under their own chuppah, that kittel has great meaning. And so to be buried in that kittel is a wonderful and important minhag. However, if the tachrichim that are being used at the tahara are tachrichim made of linen, which has this protective power, is of linen, and the kittel that was left to be brought is not made of linen, then it is preferable to use the linen kittel of the tachrichim rather than use the kittel, one's own kittel, which is not made of linen. So again, if someone is being dressed in shrouds that are not made of linen, it's perfectly okay to have a kittel brought, and it's an appropriate thing to do, even if that kittel is not made of linen. But if the Tachrichim are linen and the kittel is not linen, and there's a choice of using one Zohn kittel or using linen Tachrichim that come with the regular Tachrichim and leave their own kittel on the side, it is preferable to use the linen and not one's own kittel. I hope that's clear. Now, we were talking about Tachrichim in general, and Tachrichim again, there was a line there, Rabbi Lyons, that we missed before, and that is Tachrichim in itself. Not only does it represent what the Kohen Gadol wore, but the Tachrichim also are a strong indicator of our belief in Tchias HaMesim. The Gemara tells us that when we will come back after Tchias HaMesim, it will be in the clothing that we have. And if a person has nicer Tachrichim, if those Tachrichim are more appropriate, they're made of linen and they are nicer, then that in fact is an indicator of our deep belief in Tchias HaMesim, so that we will get up in the clothing in which we are buried. Because we believe that a person appears before God in the way in which he or she appears in the Chevra, in the grave, therefore there is another very practical aspect, and that is that the Tachrichim that we wear are Tachrichim that should be clean. And in the process of the Tahara, you need to take care that the Tachrichim remain clean. There's a very important practical part to this, not only as we dress the body to make sure that we take every precaution that there isn't any kind of, whether it's dribble from the mouth or whether it's some body waste that may dirty the Tachrichim. We need to be very careful that the Tachrichim remain clean. But it is also that in the process of taking care of the body before the Kvura, sometimes there are things that we can do beyond the Tahara itself to make sure that a body remains clean when it's finally in the Chevra. And what I'm referring to is two things. Very often in our world, there is a decision that needs to be made where and when a Tahara will be done, whether it'll be done at a time closer to death in the city or the community or the place where they died, or the Tahara will be done where the person is buried. And while there are many Chevra's Kadisha that, because they want to care for the people in their own community, may choose to bury someone, may choose to do a Tahara where the person died, and then they're going to ship it to another place. The fact is that in the process of shipping, very often the Tachrichim will be unclean, will become unclean in that process, and therefore it is strongly encouraged that Tahara, wherever possible, should be done closer to the burial, if at all possible, if it's going to a place where the burial, where there is a Chevra Kadisha and there's enough time from when it gets there so that a Tahara can be done, that is preferable so that the Tachrichim will remain clean. Another part of this is that if we do have to ship a body, for example, to Eretz Yisrael, where almost always the Tahara is done in advance of the trip, where it's done where the person died. And the reason for that is, we'll talk about that in a minute, but the reason for that is because in Eretz Yisrael, they require a Tahara before they will allow the body to get to go to Eretz Yisrael. And I believe the reason is because sometimes the time that it takes on the plane, if there is a delay And under certain circumstances, it could be that when the body gets to Eretz Yisrael, it will be in a situation where they can no longer do a tahara. In fact, in the poskim, when there is discussion when to do a tahara at the time of death or closer to the burial, the main issue, everyone agrees that tahara would be best done closer to burial for the reason we said, so the Tachrichim remain clean. The only reason to do the tahara immediately or as close to the death as possible is because it could be that the body will become in such a condition because of decomposition where it will not be able to have a proper tahara. So therefore, the poskim said, if we are in danger of that kind of a situation, do the tahara immediately, even though it might lead to dirtying the Tachrichim at a later time. I believe when we go to Eretz Yisrael, that is a part of that, since there are times where flights get diverted or delayed for one reason or another, and so they do that. They do the tahara here. On the other hand, when they get to Eretz Yisrael, very often they want to bury immediately before sundown, and they are particularly careful on that in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore they will encourage the tahara to be done before they leave, even though it has this issue. So what we need to know as a Chevra Kadisha is that if we are ever sending people to another location where the tahara is being done here, to be particularly careful in those situations to pack whatever is necessary to pack to make sure that there is no, much less of a potential for leakage, to raise the head in the aron appropriately with straw so that the head is raised and the pillow is straight so that the body will lie on the pillow appropriately and the head will be in place so that there will be less likelihood when a head is raised, it closes the airway and makes it much less likely that a person will dirty the Tachrichim through fluids that may come from the mouth. So these are all part of things that we need to do practically to make sure that the Tachrichim are maintained in the cleanest possible way.
Rabbi Zohn, could you maybe address what happens if the Tachrichim get dirty? Any good tricks for cleaning them?
Well, so I think we need to define just one point that needs to be made in defining dirt. I remember probably 40 years ago being trained in Borough Park with a Chevra Kadisha that still is around, a Chevra Kadisha called Bikur Cholim. And the person who was training me, as we finished the tahara, I noticed that there was a speck of blood on the upper part of the hand at the shoulder that somehow had come through. Something must have opened on the arm, puncture of one kind or another, and on the upper part of the shirt, right above the elbow, or the kittel, there was actually a drop of blood. And I looked at him, and he said to me, "I see how bad you feel about this. Just know that blood, if it's a small drop of blood, blood does not have the, is not considered dirt that has to be removed. Blood, ki adam hu hanefesh, blood is something that we save. Blood is an integral part of the person. While we look very carefully and we take a lot of precaution and we put in a lot of effort to make sure that Tachrichim do not have blood on it, if what is staining Tachrichim is a drop of blood, it is not something that has to be washed and cleaned. However, I would add to that, I believe that if it's in a situation where a family might identify that body and will identify and will see the blood in that process, I think for the purpose of chesed to the family, I think it is kedai to either, it is important to either let the funeral director or the shomer, whoever's going to be there at the time of the identification, let them know that there is this drop of blood that's there that will be visible, and to make sure that they cover it so that the person will not see it. But if it's in a place where that cannot be done, then I would try to clean that that area of dam. But other than that, dam, if it's a little bit of dam, is not considered something that needs to be cleaned. However, if what's on the Tachrichim is dirt, whether it's from one of the orifices that were, there was fluids from the mouth or other places where there is dirt on the Tachrichim, then you should clean the Tachrichim. And there are things that can be used. If you have to clean dam, we know that peroxide is probably the best thing to do it with. But there are all kinds of different ways in which we can clean a small spot on the Tachrichim, whether it's something like a shout pad or other things that are stain removers that could help clean Tachrichim. If Tachrichim becomes soiled to the point where it's a larger part of the Tachrichim, it's a larger area, then that article of clothing should be removed and replaced before the body is placed into the urine. And I would say even if it's in the urine, probably should be redressed even if it's in the urine. Okay, so that is where there are tachrichim that are really dirty, or even where there's a lot of blood, it needs to be replaced. But a speck of blood does not have to be removed. And if it's a speck of dirt, you certainly should make every effort to keep it as clean as possible and to remove it. Okay. There's another aspect of Tachrichim that I think are very important, and probably one of the most common issues that I deal with is the question of Tachrichim. I will get a call from my own Chevra Kadisha that a person that we're doing a tahara on is extremely large. And particularly in the world today where many people are kept alive for a long time and the kidneys fail and the body swells, or steroids are used, different medications that may make the body heavier. We need to have Tachrichim on hand that are of appropriate sizes. In our Chevra, since we service a larger area, and sometimes we're there in the middle of the night, and there is no funeral director to give us a different set of Tachrichim, we all carry, the leaders carry in their car a set of Tachrichim that is called a 3X. There is actually Tachrichim come in the regular size, which fits people up to 250, I would say. And then there's a 1X, 2X, 3X. We carry a 3X, which covers most situations, almost all situations. And we carry it with us, and we then let the funeral director know in the morning. But you should know that every Chevra Kadisha really should have Tachrichim on hand for situations where a body is particularly large. So that's something that you should have. I hate to say Tachrichim for younger people. If it's a larger community, certainly it's something that one should have on hand, even though there are minhagim in some chevras that Tachrichim is not used on children altogether. Children are just wrapped, and there is no Tachrichim. In our Chevra Kadisha, the minhag is that until a year we don't use Tachrichim. After a year we do. But certainly if it's a larger Chevra Kadisha, no one ever wants to prepare for such eventualities. But the fact is that we do need to be as prepared as possible. Certainly if Chas v'Shalom we learn that someone passed away, a young person, a child particularly passed away, and there is time. Today we can overnight things, or you may be able to get it from a Chevra Kadisha nearby. I can tell you stories, but it's not the place, the time. But we're a Chevra Kadisha that wanted to find Tachrichim that were appropriate in unusual ways. They were able to find appropriate Tachrichim. But it is something that you should have on hand. Chevra Kadisha should also have on hand an extra piece of the Tachrichim should it be necessary to replace a shirt, and there should be an understanding that they may sometimes have to do so. If we do the tahara appropriately and we are careful, I'd say the need for that is very rare and shouldn't be very common. But if it happens, there should be Tachrichim that we can use that will allow us to have a complete set of clean Tachrichim. I recently lectured in Silver Spring, Maryland, And I happened to see in the Tahara room a box that was specifically extra Tachrichim parts, where they had different Tachrichim parts. And I was extremely impressed that they had this on hand, available for the Chevra Kadisha should there be a need.
Rabbi Zohn, just to be clear, two questions. A child under 1 year old, is that a universal minhag to just use the Soviv?
It's not universal, but I think in most Chevras that is the practice. Under a year, over a year, usually Tachrichim are used. There are situations in communities where there is a request specifically even for younger children to have Tachrichim. And if there's a request, particularly if there is no specific minhag in the Chevra, I think it can be used. Okay, you could use Tachrichim, but the minhag is that we follow is, I believe, the minhag of the Gesher HaChaim. Maybe it's the minhag Yerushalayim, but the fact is that we do not use Tachrichim under a year of age. But after that, we do. Okay, but again, there are Chevras that don't until children are much older.
So then the next question would be that, let's say, God forbid, you have an older child, but the Chevra isn't stacked with the child Tachrichim. Would you delay the burial a day in order to get those, or would you just use the Soviv?
It's a good question. It's a very good question. I'm not sure that I would. It would probably. I would probably. It depends. There are too many variables. Let's put it that way. It's a combination of what will give the family more comfort, and whether there really is a minhag in the community to do one or the other. If it's a family that really would want that, it would probably be a covered issue, and we delay for covered. On the other hand, there are families where the immediate burial is of greatest importance, and therefore they would feel more comfortable to do it. And I guess you could rely on those minhagim, on those chevras that use tachrichim only from a certain age. If I remember correctly, there are ages of 3 and 6 and 9 and 12, and whatever it is, I would try to get a set of tachrichim if possible. But if it's a question of delaying versus getting a set of tachrichim, it would probably need a discussion between the rabbi, the family, the chevra, and we'd have to look at the big picture. It's not something that I am comfortable answering yes or no on and giving a clear directive. Okay, hopefully that's clear enough. Okay. The design of the Tachrichim, we spoke about the fact that it's what the Kohen Gadol wore. The minhag is that Tachrichim are sewn by Jewish people, number one. Number two, it's sewn by women. Again, these are all minhagim that are brought. I don't think that if Tachrichim were not sewn by women, that it's something that makes them puzzle. These are minhagim that are followed. And that is the minhag, sewn by hand. Again, the reason we sew them by hand, first of all, there are no knots. If we sew by machine, that's impossible. Okay, machines automatically, everything is permanently sewn, and therefore there are knots. So it's sewn by hand. It's sewn by women. It may not be the most appropriate thing to say, but what's brought down the reason why it's sewn by women is because Chava was the one who enticed Adam to eat from the Eitz Hadas, and so death came to the world as a result of something that was done by Chava. But the fact is that the minhag is that it is sewn by women, it is sewn by hand. It's not something, by the way, that should be sewn when a person dies. We don't sit down to sew tachrichim because that would delay the levaya. There should be tachrichim on hand. Most communities use tachrichim that are made in advance, that are purchased, and that have the appropriate type of garments made by hand, made by women. They have no pockets or cuffs, and the reason is we don't take anything with us. Again, This represents a core belief. A person doesn't take with them their gold, their silver, or even their children, their accomplishments of a real kind. They take with them their masim tovim, nothing material. They take with them the good deeds they accomplished, the things that they created in this world and live on after them, that are not necessarily material. All the good things that they did, the things they put into place, which continue to live, which help the world and the people in it to live better lives and appropriate lives. Those are the things they take with them. The mitzvahs, the Torah, the chesed that they did, the tzedakah they gave, those are the things they take with us, nothing material. No permanent knots, again, is based on our belief in Tchias HaMesim and the fact that we will be resurrected very shortly, Be'ez Hashem B'karov, and so we show that by not making the knots permanent, to show that we believe achakelo b'chol yom sheyavo, as we say in the Ani Mamin, we hope and we believe and we wait longingly for Mashiach to come at any time, b'chol yom sheyavo. Okay, so that is the design. Would like to, before we get to the knots, I would like to talk about what the Tachrichim are, the clothing, the garments that we have. The Tachrichim are a mitznefes. There is a hat, a hood, and that is for men. For men, it's like a hood that covers the entire head. For women, it's a bonnet and a veil made of two parts. There's a bonnet with a bow on the bottom, similar to all the bows that we have on the other articles of clothes, as well as a veil, a face cover, almost like a burqa, but it's white, same linen, and it goes over the face and fits into the bonnet or above the bonnet and covers the face, since the bonnet is open in the front. There are pants and a shirt and bendlach, which are little bands, which we'll talk about a little later. We've probably seen them, bands. There is also a kittel. There is a what is similar to what the Kohen Gadol wore, a me'il. It's like the me'il that was worn by the Kohen. Gartel, a avnet, the belt, the sovev, which is the wrap, and a pillow. All of this comes in the set of Tachrichim, and if it's linen, all of these will be made of linen and should be sewn with linen thread. There is a difference, and it's not just what, there is a very specific order of how these things are dressed. We start with the mitznefes. We start with the head covering. For the women, the bonnet. For the men, the full head, the full cover of the head. The veil is questionable. In some Chevra's Kadisha, they will actually tie the veil immediately. In other Chevra's Kadisha, they will just leave the veil on top and will tie it when it's in the aron, or at least after everything is dressed, just because practically, in order to be able to dress the person in Tachrichim, if there is a veil which is kind of loose over the face, and you have to bring the shirt and the kittel over the head, it's very likely going to be hampered by the veil being there. So many places they just leave it there loose and they tie it after the Tachrichim are done. The question of which comes first, the pants or the shirt, it's a good question. And there are different opinions. Some Chevra's Kadisha put on the pants first. Some Chevra's Kadisha put on the shirt first. And the reason for the discrepancy, the reason for the difference is based in the pasuk we had before. Rabbi Lyons, if you can scroll back to the pasuk that describes the Kohen Gadol and what he wore, right here, you will see it says in pasuk Daled, Ksones bat kodesh yilbash. He wore a sacred, holy shirt made of linen. And linen pants should be on his flesh. So the question is in the pasuk, and we also, as many chevras do, say this pasuk as we are dressing the body. The ksones comes first. So if we're saying the pasuk, the ksones, the shirt, would be the first thing we would say. On the other hand, for those who know the halacha and know what in fact the Kohen Gadol did when he was getting dressed, he put the pants on first. And the way the pasuk is read, he should wear a sacred linen shirt, linen pants, yihiyu al basaro, but they wore on his flesh. They already were. It should be yihiyu, could also be in the avar, in the past. So it was on his flesh, and so he was already dressed in that. So there's a difference of whether we follow what in fact he did, or we follow that which the pasuk has, the order that the pasuk has. So this is the discrepancy. But what is very important for any Chevra Kadisha member to know is that if you put on the pants first, then the shirt has to go over the pants. If you put the shirt on first, then the pants go over the shirt. But we don't put the pants on first and then tuck the shirt into the pants. So if you put the pants on first, then the person has the shirt coming over the pants. I think there's a company now, they call it Untuck It. Okay, it's a shirt that's untucked. It's like the teenagers. Unfortunately, they get their way after 120 years, according to this minhag. But whichever one it is, whichever goes first, the other one has to go over it. So that's something that's important. So we can move back again, and then there is that order. There is that seder hatahara. There is the order of the tahara, and that includes the this particular order: the pants, the shirt, or the shirt, the pants, whichever. Bendlach are little bands that tie on the pants. The pants, by the way, is made of closed feet. In many communities, most Tachrichim today are made with closed feet, like almost like baby pajamas without the elastic, but it has closed feet, and the entire foot is covered with the pants. So these bands are tied at the ankles for men and right below the knee for women. So there is that one difference in how they, besides the bonnet and the veil, which women have, and the men have the mitznefes, which is a hood. This is the other difference. Other than that, the Tachrichim are exactly the same. I won't take much time on it, but the question that many people have is why, first of all, what are these bands? The Kohen Gadol didn't wear them. What is the purpose of them? And there's a lot more to be said about this than what I will say, but the idea is that the Tachrichim are meant to be uniform for everyone. It's not just the rich and the poor, it's also the men and women wear the same set of clothes. There's only one problem, and that is that women generally do not wear pants, okay? And as I have often joked, I said, women who would never dream of wearing pants during their lifetime are suddenly caught dead in pants. How could that be? So the answer is that these bendlach, these bands, are actually meant to define the clothing. So if you can visualize, and maybe we will see it later, I don't know if we're going to get to that particular video. We do have a few videos we were going to show, but the pants, if you can visualize these band, a little band, like a little belt being tied at the ankle, okay, for the men, what it will do is define the clothing as being a shoe below this band and a pair of pants above the band. So it separates it. For the women, it is tied underneath the knee. And that is because until 100 years ago, those of you who may remember Scarlett O'Hara will know that women used to wear pantaloons. Women wore undergarments that were tied below the knee. And so for them, the pants are now defined as an undergarment, and the rest of the pants is a high boot which women wear. So it's defining the clothes, the same clothing in actuality that was worn by the Kohen Gadol, are defined differently for the men and the women. For the men, the kittel is the me'il. For the women, the kittel is a dress going over the undergarments. Okay, that is what the Tachrichim are and what they represent. Now, I'm going to just digress for one moment, and that is one of the questions that was asked was a question about why are we permitted to pass things over the body, and what is the source for it? The fact is that it's one of those things that we don't know an exact source for. I don't know an exact source for, although it is brought in the practices of different Chevras Kadisha. And I think it's just something that we have according to Kabbalah. It is something that has been handed down as something that is seen as disrespectful. It might be because of other things that we know we don't pass over a person and so on. But that is the reason. It is brought down, and there are Chevras that practice it, but an exact source, I really don't know, but it is appropriate not to pass things over a nifter, over the body. So if you're in the middle of washing the body and you need to give someone something, a cloth that has blood on it to clean on the other side, just walk to the foot of the table and to the head of the table and hand it to the person on the other side. Slip knots. Now, this is probably the most complex in the sense that there is very little uniformity in this one area of the Tachrichim. Every Chevra Kadisha does not make knots. Every Chevra Kadisha will turn the bands that come at every article of clothes comes with a band, whether it's the pants, whether it's the bonnet for the woman, whether it's the shirt and the kittel for the men and the women, as well as the gartel. They all have turns and then slip knots, but we don't make complete knots. We don't make knots that cannot be opened easily, that are permanent. Okay, how many twists varies considerably from Chevra to Chevra. Very, very hard to actually give you a number. When I lecture to Chevras Kadisha that are either starting out or don't have a minhag, and sometimes it becomes a point of contention within a Chevra Kadisha because one person came from a Chevra where they did 7, and one came from a Chevra that did 3, and another one came from a Chevra that does 4. I tell them that the generic, the most common and probably the most used number is the number of 4. And I say it because I've seen it. I also know that the manual that was written in Chicago in the 70s uses the number of 4, and it was approved by a Talmud of Moshe Feinstein, he should live in Mirel or Peretz Steinberg, as well as by a Hasidic Rebbe in Chicago, Rav Meisel Zichron Livracha, as well as by a Rav in a Litvish town who was a Rosh Yeshiva in Skokie. So those people all agreed on the number 4. So to me, that sounds pretty good. And so I would say that the number 4 is probably the generic number. But our Chevra does it differently. The women, I believe, Erica, you can say yes. The women, I think, do 4. Is that correct? 4 turns pretty much everywhere except on the gartel. Okay. The men have very different numbers. We have 7 and 9 and 5 and all kinds of numbers. Where do all these numbers come from? We know the number 13, where that comes from. 13 is the 13 attributes of mercy. And so all of these, in one way or another, reference things that represent mercy. The name of Hashem, which is the name of mercy, is the Yud Kei Vav Kei. And by the way, The numerical value of that is 26, which is 2 times 13. And these all are shemus. They're all names. All these numbers have Kabbalistic meaning. And the goal is that they somehow represent things that represent rachamim, that represent compassion. And the hope is, the goal is that that Hashem will have compassion upon us by through these twists. We represent those we try to invoke those midas of rachmim of the Ribono Shlom. So the one place where everybody almost does the same is on the gartel, and there most chevras will do 13 terms. There are different minhagim as to whether these belts are turned by 2 people or by 1 person. There are chevras where certain things are done by 2 people, like the belt and the belt on the pants, the tie on the pants. But by the face, I remember of Yaakov Kamenetsky telling me that by the face, since if you had 2 people turning right by the neck, it would mean that they would be going over right in front of the face of the person. He said to me, Chevra Kadisha, they don't do that because it's not covered for the person who is lying there. But many chevras do. The same is true by the feet. There are some chevras that will not turn the bands on both sides because it's going over the body. It means one person on one side is going over the leg to get to turn the other side. These are all differences in different places. So these are all aspects of twists and knots, and it's complicated. Whatever you're doing is fine. I would not change it, but the one thing you do want to do is be consistent. You want to have a minhag that your chevra follows, and it should be something that you understand has meaning, even if we don't necessarily know the exact meaning of any one of these particular minhagim. But it's been passed down from generation to generation, and whatever you're doing is fine, but it should be becovered, it should be b'shalom. There shouldn't be fights over this. Come to a decision, come to a conclusion, and stick with it. Okay. Okay. Now, in order to really, I didn't realize how late it is. In order for us to do the process, we need, each person should have his or own position and job to do. It is very helpful in the Tahara process to have a Rosh. Every Tahara should have a person who is a Rosh, who is in charge, and they should designate positions, knowing the strengths of people. If it's a chevra that certainly works together frequently, but a person should know their place, and particularly with dressing Tachrichim, if you want to do it in a way that is going to be as wrinkle-free and as respectful and as clean as possible, it really is better to just leave 2 people to put on the pants, and 2 people to put on the shirt, and 2 people to put on the kittel, and everyone should just do what they are doing without having someone else who's free try to help them. And we're going to try to show a little bit of this process so that hopefully we will be able to give you some clear direction on this. Hopefully you will find it helpful. Rabbi Lyons, okay, keep shrouds clean, straight, wrinkle-free, as with everything in the Tahara process. Teamwork, very important. Don't multitask. Don't try to hold the head while you're pulling the Tachrichim over. Let someone hold the head and you pull the Tachrichim over. And follow the established technique. Don't try to be innovative on something that you really don't know what the result of that innovation is going to be. Learn the process. We have some videos on from last year, our webinar, which goes through the dressing process quite well. It's a long video, it's 2 3/4 hours, but you could find the area that you want to look at. And these are all available on nask.org. And you'll find the videos that we're going to show, maybe some that we didn't show, on that website as well. So, Rabbi Lyons, are we up to the videos?
Okay, yeah. Could we go through a couple of questions that were on the chat?
Sure. We're over 9, but
Okay, I think in a worst case scenario, we do have these short videos. We have the long one that Rabbi Zohn referred to, which is on nas.org. We do have these shorter videos that go through different steps of the process, and all of that we intend to send out when we send out the recording link, just for everybody's knowledge. Okay, couple of questions about people's regular clothing. One question was if somebody has like a favorite T-shirt they want under the Tachrichim. The other question was if they're going to be dressed over the Tachrichim. So then what is does the Chevra Kadisha not get involved at all in protest, or do we?
Okay, no. Okay, so let's take one at a time. The question about somebody wants a T-shirt underneath the Tachrichim. First of all, Tachrichim are very specific, and there is, as we see, we talked about one thread changing it. There's a lot of meaning and value to Tachrichim. I would certainly discourage anything under the Tachrichim, or to use the shirt instead of any of the Tachrichim. That certainly is something that I would not sanction under any circumstances. There are times where we will compromise with a family where we do the tahara completely as it was meant to be done with the minhagim that we normally follow. And then we dress we have the funeral director put on clothing on top. I would encourage the funeral director to do this dressing in the way many of them do, which is they actually slice the shirt and they slice the jacket in the back, so they just tuck it underneath. But in the back, it's open. So this way, it's a question whether that's really a malbush, whether that really is an article of clothing, but it looks like they're in that clothes. Many funeral homes dress all their bodies that way because who's going to know? Okay, it's not fur covered. And so that might be how I would recommend it. But I would certainly not place a distinctive article of clothing belonging to this person inside the Tachrichim as a shirt instead of. I would dress the only such accommodation that I am aware of was accommodated in this country in the 40s and 50s, where tahara was very, very, very minimally done. And so as long as the tahara process was done appropriately, they allowed clothing to be placed on top without removing the tachrichim. That clothing should not be replacing anything from the regular tachrichim, and it should not be done by members of the Chevra Kadisha. It should be done by people other than the Chevra Kadisha. It's an accommodation that people need to know. If in their own community they feel it's necessary, in a specific case, that's fine. It's not something that we would recommend be even recommended to a funeral director to offer as an option. It's not an option. It's a big b'di'evet. It's a very unfortunate thing that takes away so much of, we're talking about standing before Hashem. Is Hashem going to be impressed? Is this person going to be comfortable standing before Hashem in that favorite T-shirt or jogging suit or Brooks Brothers suit? That's not the meaning. And in the Olam HaEmes, in the world of truth, their subjective liking of this set of clothing is not something that will give them cover. So we need to try to get that point across. It's not something that we encourage, but it is an accommodation. Okay. I will never forget when I did a tahara many years ago of a man who came up from Florida. He was tanned, looked like he was in perfect health. Obviously he was dead, but he was on the table. And as we opened the pouch that he was in, he was wearing a T-shirt with on the T-shirt was a palm tree and a beach in the background. And it says, "I have a great life, but no time to live." And it was probably one of the most powerful moments in my Chevra Kadisha experience, to see this, we wake up every morning, we say, Moda Ani Lefanecha, we thank Hashem for giving us back our neshama. But when you see this, it was just such a powerful, powerful message. But in any case, Rabbi Lyons.
Okay, next question is, if you're going back.
I don't think I ever told the story before.
I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hate to say this, I saved the t-shirt, but in any case, go on. Yeah.
Okay, getting back to the under 1-year-old, what is the reason to not have a regular set of Tachrichim and to only use a Sovev?
I'm not sure exactly what the minhag is, why it is that way. Maybe because they didn't have a set of Tachrichim available. I don't know. It's hard to know. I don't know why. In all of the laws, one of the most difficult aspects of Chevra Kadisha is the laws that apply to the burial of children, even children who are, stillbirths or die very young. There's a lot that we do not do in that process. There are places where they will not allow matzeva to be put up. They don't allow. We live in a very different world, and in today's world, we don't understand this. On the other hand, you have to realize that until the century, infant mortality was very, very, very much a part of life, so that many families had many children, only half of whom survived past early childhood. It was not uncommon. So I myself had a great grandparents who had 11 children, 9 of which died in a flu epidemic. Okay, so this was common. So it's hard to know, and I'm in Hugging come from that. It's very difficult to know exactly why, but that is the minhag. Okay.
A question came up a different way. As far as getting back to the street clothing or the favorite T-shirt or the soldier's uniform. If the request is to fold it up and put it in the aron.
That's certainly much better. I have no issue with that at all. It goes into a category that I would call almost narishkeit. It doesn't really have any, it's an emotional feeling. They want to have it with them. If it comes from a belief in, I'm going to get up Tchias HaMeis and I want my favorite jogging suit. So as soon as I get up, I can, go for a jog. Hey, okay. It's silly in an intelligent way, but it's an emotional thing, not necessarily an intellectual thing, but it's not a problem. It's not dressing the person, and you can put it in the aron. I have no issue with it. I mean, again, I wouldn't encourage it. No problem if that's what they want.
Okay, there's also a.
It's certainly an option they should be given, rather than dressing the body in Tachrichim. But especially today, when I started in 1970, the big battle was viewing. Jewish people had viewings all the time. Okay, the funeral family would come the night before and sit for an hour or two, many with an open casket. Okay, that was the big battle in those days, embalming and viewing. Today, that's not the issue. It's just clothing. If there's a closed casket, why would anyone care if they're dressed in shrouds? Who are they dressing up for? Unless it's the Ribono Shalom, unless there's someone that really does see them, as we know they do. So is the Ribono Shalom going to be is going to be impressed with the clothing they're wearing? It's an emotional thing, and if it's explained, I think very often it needs to be explained as the appropriate dress for this occasion. And very often I have been able to, and I think many others have been able to convince families of the meaning and the importance and the beauty of doing it the traditional way. Go on.
Okay, real quick.
Yeah.
There might be some type of dirt or stain on the Tachrichim that they're able to clean off successfully, but then the Tachrichim are damp. So just
that's
be clear.
Fine. That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
The next question was asking for the makor for knots. That this is coming from. I usually don't reveal the identity, but this is our favorite researcher, Isaac Pollack, who personal shout out. I enjoyed reading your piece, Isaac.
We just came across it that was sent to one of our staff members.
Yeah.
But in any case, Isaac, I don't know again. We had to make knots that were not permanent, and so I think it became a way of making half knots, And maybe in the process of doing that, we know that some chevras have shins, and so they're, for whatever reason, there are certain minhagim. Again, the shin being part of the name of Hashem. Maybe it comes from the idea of shame, of name. I don't know, but I really don't know. But this goes back quite a bit, and I'm really unclear. But it is brought by Chevra's Kadisha, having this for many, many years. And again, it all comes from Kabbalah and Shemos Hakdoshim. I know you've been involved in Mavri Yabok. Certainly there's a lot in the Mavri Yabok about this, most of which I don't fully understand. But the idea is that it is something that we have as a tradition. And we feel very strongly, it's brought down in many places that traditions in general are given the strength. We know Minhag Yisrael is a Kedin. We treat it as a law. Okay, but particularly in the area of Chevra Kadisha, there is a stronger emphasis on maintaining minhagim. There are many Sfarim that make that point, maybe because we don't know, and therefore it would lead to freely changing the minhagim, that there was a stronger emphasis on maintaining them very strictly and very religiously. So for whatever the reasons are, but there's a famous Beis Lechem Yehuda where they made some changes, and there was kind of an epidemic in the town where young people died, whatever it might be. There's all kinds of stories and things throughout history where change in Chevra Kadisha's minhagim was not a good thing. It did not lead to a happy ending. Okay? What else? I would like to show at least one video, if we can. Is that okay, Rabbi Lyons?
Sure.
Perhaps the video for knots. Can we do that?
Knots.
Since we're spending so much time on knots, it's either that or perhaps the pillow. They're not very long, and it might be worthwhile. I find that Chevra's Kadisha, by the way, it's not a bad idea to take just a shoelace or anything that you like and practice making knots. A lot of people have trouble with it. If you need to, just practice. Practice makes perfect. You don't need a body to practice on. You can practice anywhere. Just take something that's similar to a belt and just practice. Okay. The minhag, by the way, in many Chevra's Kadisha, which you might see if you see the video, is to make a shin on specifically at the belt. There is a shin, some Chevras that make a shin almost everywhere. There's also a minhag to have these slip knots facing the heart, so that at the lower part of the body, the slip knots face up, at the lower part of the body, at the upper part of the body, by the neck, by the bonnet, as well as the shirt and the kittel. They make them facing the heart, whereas they turn it down by the bands on the feet and the gartel and the pants. They have them facing up towards the heart. Okay, Rabbi Lyons.
Tied at the neck as well. There are some covers that do this right at the beginning before they.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
After they put on the bonnet.
Hold on. Do you see it?
I don't see anything.
Hold on 1 second. Oh, sorry, got it. I'll start over.
Okay, yeah, please start from the beginning. And maybe, is there any way that you could raise the sound? Okay.
How the women put on the head covering. The bonnet was already put on.
Okay, it was one of the questions. You can stop it for a moment, Rabbi Lyons. One of the questions that was sent in was about the face covering, that this woman is showing us. The question is, after the bonnet is put on, okay, do you want to go back and show how she put on the face cover itself? Because that's a question that many chevers really have a problem with. Do you want to go back a drop? Can you back up a little bit? maybe even more. Yeah. Okay, stop right here. She places the face cover over the face. The bonnet is underneath. And what you see at the band, for the men who are watching, the band is at the upper part. It's a square piece of material with a band at one end. Okay, that band is at the head. It's at the upper part, so that the bottom of that square is loose, is flapping. Okay, what this woman is doing is she put the face covering over the face, and she is now bringing the band underneath the head, crossing it under the head, and then bringing it up over the face. Okay, if you could see that, you can continue. Okay, right, that band was brought up, and she is now tying it underneath the chin. Okay, now again, this is a band that is from the face covering, and it's crossed under the head and then tied at the chin, underneath the chin. There are Chevra's Kadisha. You can stop this if you want from my lines. There are Chevra's Kadisha that will actually tie this tie at the forehead, so that the tie will be right here on the side, either the right side or the left side. I believe they usually do it on the right side, but whatever it is, it's tied at the forehead and the flap remains open. What she is doing is she's tying it underneath the chin, and again, the flap will be able to open and close. If you continue, we will talk about doing it another way after she finishes making that slip knot. If it's going to be a situation where, okay, you can stop it from my lines because we moved on to the next thing. But what some Chevras will do, particularly when they're going to Eretz Yisrael, or if body is being shipped somewhere, or it's a situation where you know that no one is going to identify after the Tahara, they close the face cover and then tie that band over the face cover, right over the face cover, holding the face cover down with the band, not as it was shown before where the face cover is up and they're tying it under the chin and the face cover remains flopping. They tie it under the chin, but the face cover is under it, so that it's actually pulling the face cover into place and holding it there. The advantage of that is that the mouth will obviously not be open or visibly open. And if there are shards on the eyes, which of course there are, it will hold them in place and they will not fall off in the process of moving and shipping and so on. Okay, all right. One thing that I want to show before you go on, which is that when you make these ties at the neck, whether it's on the shirt or it's on the kittel, there should be no gap in the material at the neck, so that the material at the neck where those bands meet should be as closed as possible. It should be up against each other and be closed rather than spread to the side. You need to be careful when you're dressing the body that it's free and that the material is brought together. Okay, you can go on. So here you see them having two people turning these bands. This is at the stomach. Okay, this is on the pants. Okay, and that is the way in which the slip knot is made. She may be pointing out that in some places the slip knot is separated. In some places it is kept together. In other words, they spread the two slip knots so it looks like two separate bows. Here you see the bands at the feet for the men, and it is being done by two separate people rather than being done over by two people doing each one and doing it together, which would require them to cross over the legs. This is where we are showing how to put on the gartel. Our way of doing it tries to maintain the gartel without it being twisted. So you put it under the neck where it's easy to put it across, and then just slide it through with a little tension towards the feet, and making sure that at the end it is straight and not twisted. Okay, if you can see, it's straight, and then we bring it up and we tie it over the kittel, over the jacket or the dress, whichever way you want to look at it.
Rabbi Zohn, we're also supposed to have the disclaimer that this was filmed pre-pandemic, which is why
Oh yes, I was going to mention that this was before we were wearing masks at all our taharas, and now that the pandemic is coming, unfortunately, is on the rise again. Chevras may be particularly more careful. I don't think, again, I will say this, I've said this many times, and I will quote Rabbi Dr. Aaron Galat, who said this to me very clearly, that he has not seen anything in the literature to indicate that anyone has been able to, that anyone has contracted COVID from a body. It is the people alive in the room who are breathing who are in much greater danger. And so if you're in shul and doing things and are there, and you're in stores that are there, wear masks, wear good masks if you have to, and be careful, but it really should not, you should not worry about contracting COVID from a body itself. If you are concerned, certainly you can use bleach in the water, which was part of our protocol, as well as pack the mouth and remove it at the very end. Those are probably the only two things that I would do that might protect us from, or would protect us from, getting sick from the body itself, which really is not indicated. Okay. Rabbi Lyons? Okay, so we're going to show this because there's a very nice little thing here, and that if you could learn how to do it by watching this, it would be worthwhile. This is the loops that are made at the gartel, at the belt, and if you take a loop at it, okay, we brought, before we made the loop, stop it right, so can you go back and stop it? Can you go back one? Back up a little bit. Or more. Before, go back a little more. Okay, stop right there. You have two people, each one is holding a belt, basically. They've made all the twists and now they hold a belt. But they're going to make loops from that belt from that long string under the belt itself. But the way in which they're going to do it, they're first going to bring a loop under the belt and then bring the material through. Watch what they do and you'll see what is accomplished. You can go on. Okay, she's bringing through that piece of material. Go on. That's the loop that she is making now. And then she brings that long string through and pulls it, so that what you have is, you have a loop that is being held by a something covering it that holds it in place and does not allow it to move. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. She's going to do the same in the second one. And that's, again, here she would have pulled the loop down. She would have made a loop by bringing the material underneath and then pulling the loop through. It gives you that little piece that holds the loop in place so it doesn't just flop back and forth. You'll see it on all of these that she's doing. We end up with two on the left side, one up and one down on the right side of the body. The three loops are a shin. The one going down, if you see the belt as part of it, the one going down is a dalid. You have the piece going down and the belt itself forming a dalid, which is shin and a dalid, and the person is a yud, a Jew, and therefore it forms the name of Hashem. This is a minhag that is followed in many places. Okay.
Okay.
All right. If okay, it's 9:30. I think we're gonna take. Do we have any other questions that were asked, or we're done?
Hold on, there was one. There was one about how to deal with family members who want to participate in the dressing.
Okay, it's a very touchy subject, and the custom that we follow is we will allow family members in, and there are other chevras that may have absolute rules never allowing a family member in, but it is an Indian of kavod not to have a family member in at a tahara, and that could be the same family member that during their lifetime, maybe a day before, was bathing this loved one. The fact is that it's not covered in the tahara process, so we wait until the body is dressed, at least the pants, the shirt, and then if they want to help at that point, particularly with the bands on the feet, we'll help them, allow them to turn, we'll help them even place the body into the casket sometimes. Certainly in the casket, we will allow them to put on the sherbloch, put on the earth, on the face, which by the way is a minhag among the Bukharian Jews that only the children do that. But there are reasons besides the kavod issue. I have found that when you have a family member in a tahara room, it lends itself to the tahara people being very, very uncomfortable. You have a tahara where there are tubes, where there are some, or something starts bleeding, or something starts, hi Isaac, I see you. Well, I'm sorry I couldn't give you a better answer before, but it's the best. Maybe you'll give me an answer afterwards. But the point is that there is a real sense of discomfort when you are in a tahara room with family members in many instances. I've seen it, I've heard it, and sometimes the end result is less covered to the person because you're afraid to do certain things that you really would do otherwise because it's just not comfortable to do in the presence of someone from the family. So even if it's not a child, even if someone may be a little distant, it's up to the Chevra Kadisha to permit it or not permit it. But for children, it is clearly brought that they should not be, or even for nephews and nieces who need to give cover to their aunts and uncles, the minhag is that we, at least in our Chevra and in many Chevras, we don't allow children in until the body is dressed.
Okay, one more question I was supposed to ask earlier, and then we'll hold it there. Tachrichim get torn a little bit.
First of all, you have to be extremely, extremely careful in the process. For example, we're talking about Tachrichim. Most common thing when you're using hand-sewn linen Tachrichim and you're pulling down the me'il or the shirt or the kittel, and you're pulling it so you have a seam running alongside the body, okay? Keeping the upper part of the shirt and the lower part of the shirt together, but it's just big stitches, hand sewn. If you pull on the part of the Tachrichim that is on, you're holding the upper part and you pull from there trying to pull it down, you're going to tear it almost definitely. So you have to be careful when you're pulling down that you use the lower part of the material so that there's no pressure and no stress on the stitches themselves, okay? If it tears a little bit, there are Chevra's Kadisha that will actually sew it. Generally, if it's just a small tear, we will not sew it. But if there are people there who want to sew it, they can. If there's, for example, this has happened many times, and maybe I've told the story too many times, but maybe I should talk about it. I wasn't planning on telling it, but maybe I will. And that is, if you don't mind hearing again or staying a few minutes. But a very common place for Tachrichim tear is at the neck, for the kittel particularly. The bands on the kittel, different than all the other bands which slide through a hem kind of that is made, these bands are just tied, they're just sewn onto the material itself. And it's sewn pretty loosely. The problem can be that as you're even opening them up, because very often they come from the manufacturer in a kind of a slip knot. If you open them as you do it, if you're not careful, or if they didn't sew it that well, or if it's very thin, it might just tear off. What do you do with that? And it really should be sewn, but if it's linen, it should be sewn with a linen thread. I have told the story and I'll tell it again very quickly. I'll try to be as quick as I can, but I remember a story. This goes back many, many years ago. The story was unusual in the fact that I got this call from a man out of the blue at a hospital who calls me and said, Rabbi Zohn, are you the person who does taharas at Parkside? I said, yes. I could say that now, Joel. Parkside is not part of your company. It's okay. But there is, so I said, yeah, we are. He said, I want to make sure that the tahara is done appropriately, because my father was a very special man and it meant a lot to him. So I said, sure, but I had learned enough. I put him on hold. This was before we had cell phones. I put him on hold and I called Parkside and I said, are you doing the tahara? Are you doing the service for this family? And the guy at Parkside said, no, we're not. I said, what do you mean? He just told me the funeral is going to be at Parkside. He said, yes, the funeral is going to be at Parkside, but Kirschenbaum is the funeral director. They're taking the body to Brooklyn where the tahara is going to be done in Kirschenbaum, and then they're going to bring it to Parkside for the funeral. So I get back on the phone and I say, we're not doing this. It's going to be done in Brooklyn. So he says, what? You're going to take my father from Forest Hills to Brooklyn and then bring him back to Forest Hills? Makes no sense. He was in a hospital in Forest Hills. I said, you're right, it makes no sense, but that's how funeral homes generally do it. They want to do their taharas in their own facility. So he says, what can I do? I don't want that. I said, speak to Kirschenbaum, tell them you want it left at Parkside, and I'll call Parkside and see if it's okay. So we did that, and sure enough, it went straight to Parkside. Normally, this tahara would have been done the night before, because it was a 9 o'clock service. And when it's that early a service, it's either we have to daven very early to get the tahara done in time. And in those days, we were all yeshiva guys, we were up late. We didn't want to do that. So it was a question of, normally we would do that the night before. Well, that night there were 4 women taharas at Parkside, and we decided we're going to go daven early and come and do it, which is the greater covenant. We spoke about it before. Doing it closer to the burial is the biggest covenant. So here we now have, the man doesn't go to Brooklyn. Now he comes to, the tahara ends up being done in the best way. We opened the Tachrichim, and he had told me that his father has his own set of Tachrichim. And in my mind, I thought he might have a kittel, because many times they say, oh, we got our own set of Tachrichim. And what they mean is they come with a kittel. But the fact is, this was a box of Tachrichim, and I opened it up, and this was the most beautiful set of Tachrichim I have ever seen. Now, what's a beautiful set of Tachrichim? A beautiful set of Tachrichim was on all of the different articles of clothing, rather than have that hem and the things slipping from side to side, there were little cut out diamond-shaped cutouts, which were perfectly, they were symmetrical. They were exactly the same throughout the whole thing. And the band was woven through these little openings on all the different garments. It was beautiful. And as I opened the Tachrichim, and I opened the band on the kittel, which was the one place where there was no hem, it tore. And here I feel terrible. Here's this beautiful set of Tachrichim, and I tore it. But I felt worse, because literally, it must have been within a week before, I had been giving a class to my Chevra Kadisha, and one of the women said to me, Rabbi, when that band on the kittel tears off, and you need to sew it, do you need to use linen thread? She asked me this question. And I said, at that time, I said, I would imagine you do. I said, but it's really funny. The men never sew this. No, we don't do that. That's a woman thing. Okay. So I kind of made fun of it. And here I'm saying to myself, I'm being slapped right now for saying that, because here I would love for this set of Tachrichim, I want to sew it. Okay. And I'm standing there deep in thought, feeling terrible. And one of the Chevra guys comes out to see what's holding me up. And I said to him, look at this beautiful set of Tachrichim. And I just tore off the band and I don't have anything to sew it with. I wish I could sew it. He says, look, Elchonon, take a look. In the kittel was a needle, threaded with linen thread, sitting in the kittel. I sewed it. It was unbelievable. I will never, ever forget the story. It was an unbelievable story, but it's, obviously this person had a zechus. I took this needle and I went upstairs, because by the time we finished, it was late. It was probably close to 8:30. The Levaya was starting at 9. I went upstairs and I said to the son who had called me the day before, I said, I'm Rabbi Zohn. We spoke yesterday. I was the one who made sure that he gets brought to Parkside rather than taken to Brooklyn. I said, I don't know who your father was. I have no idea who he was, but he must have been a special guy, because there are just too many things going on here that make no sense, that don't all happen. It's not a coincidence. And you know what he said to me? He said, my father was a good Jew. He said, never missed davening. He grew up in the United States with Shomer Shabbos when no one else was. He said, but the love of his life, the mitzvah that meant the most to him, was he and his sister started the Chevra Kadisha in Jamaica, New York. And for years and years, they ran that Chevra. And the clothing, those Tachrichim, were made by his sister for the family members, just for them. And it was a work of love. Whether she left a needle in everyone, I don't know if it was left on purpose, but it was just unbelievable. But you see, one thing you see is, people who are involved in Chevra Kadisha work, they mean it sincerely. We get the covered back. Mida connected Mida, we get it back. Okay, on that happy note, I think we will say goodnight. And thank you all for being and listening and staying this late. And hopefully we will all be zoche to go out of business soon. As I've said to many people, I'm retirement age. I can handle it at this point. And whatever it is, we want to certainly see the end to all the mishigas and the tzaras that are out there. Okay, have a very good night. Thank you, Rabbi Lyons. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Zohn. Thank you all.
Thank you, Isaac. I really feel bad. I was going to comment, but you sent it back to someone on my staff, and I didn't see it for a long time. Okay, be well. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Okay. Good night.